Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Adrenal Fatigue podcast. It's Danielle here today. It's just me today, and I wanted to take time to do an episode today on food as part of your adrenal fatigue recovery journey. Obviously, this is a really important part of the puzzle, and it's something that we're kind of always talking about pretty generally. But today, I wanted to take an opportunity to just talk about it in a little bit more detail, give you some more specifics when it comes to where to start, and answer some of the most common questions that we get in our adrenal fatigue community when it comes to the food side. Because I know this is something that can feel really complicated, it can feel daunting when you're tired. The idea of meal prepping a bunch of stuff, figuring out what's going to work and what doesn't work, it can just be a lot. So my whole premise as a nutritionist, for those of you guys who know me, my whole thing is Simply Nourished, right? Like how to make things so simple and stress-free for you. My own journey into this whole world of nutrition started with me having stage 3 burnout and a ton of gut issues. So I've been there in the trenches with you. I know how frustrating and upsetting that this can be, especially when you're doing a lot of things and not seeing the fruits of your labor for all the effort that you're putting in. And I know how much that effort is worth when you're really, really tired. So let's dive in. Let's chat about food. Make sure you're following us on Instagram, the Adrenal Recovery Collective, and let's keep this conversation going. Let us know what you want to hear more of. We've been getting some great feedback on this podcast, and we're so excited that you guys are finding it valuable. So let us know what topics are of interest to you. Do you find this one helpful? Do you want more about food, more mindset stuff? Anything you're wondering about when it comes to your adrenal fatigue recovery, we want to support you. So let us know. But okay, let's talk food. This can be such a transformative part of your adrenal fatigue recovery journey. And what I love about food and why I'm so passionate about food is because you can literally have overnight wins. Like changing your diet can give you some really significant improvements quickly, which I think we could all use when we're feeling depleted. So we all know when it comes to hormones, it can take time, right? It can take a good 3 months at least for a lot of hormones to cycle through and for you to really start seeing results from the stuff that you're doing to really like overcome burnout and overcome your adrenal issues. And yeah, food can take a while too, but there's some things that can happen quickly. And I think that gives us motivation. And that's what I really love about food because it makes such a big difference as it compiles on one another and as you keep at it. But you can feel better right away, whether it's just removing something that you might be sensitive to, removing something that's really inflaming you, adding something that you were really deficient in. So it's just a topic I love to chat about. I want to keep this episode relatively short and just kind of concise and give you a really good jump off point today. And by all means, we can dive in deeper later. So let's jump in. So I think a really important part to start when we're thinking about adrenal fatigue, when we're thinking about burnout, and then thinking about food is that we need to remember that being burnt out is a state of depletion. A lot of the times, and what we see in our practice is there's a lot of deficiencies going on. There's a lot of, maybe it's nutrient deficiencies or hormonal deficiencies. There's a lot of stuff that's just kind of lacking. And so when we think about how we can use food to support our recoveries, we really want to think about replenishing, right? And giving our body clean, like usable fuel that's really going to help nourish us back up. So I think when we just start thinking about food as fuel and start thinking about it that way, rather as just like something that's comforting and something that's delicious, just also thinking that food is fuel and going to help replenish you, especially if you're depleted, is a really important mindset to have because it just opens up, I think, a whole nother spectrum of thinking of when it comes to the types of foods that are going to support your recovery. So that being said, I think that really allows us to analyze our current diet and our current situation to figure out what's working for us and what's not. And a lot of the times, if we're being honest, we have a pretty good indication of what is working and what isn't working, where the shortcomings in our own diet might be. So I really encourage you to just sit down and just think about it. Just like put away the distractions for a bit. Think about what's working, what's not working. What could you add? What could you take away? What are you having too much of? what's not in alignment right now when you think about it honestly? That's something only you can answer, but I think that this is a really strong foundation to set for yourself, just analyzing what you're doing right now. And then we mentioned that adrenal fatigue, burnout, it's a state of depletion, right? So the last thing we want to do when we're already depleted is just add a whole bunch of restrictions and rules around food that are gonna kind of contribute to us feeling more depleted, whether it's energetically, whether it's actually nutritionally depleted. So I want you to think about this too. So what I'm kind of coming back to with this one is we want to eat regularly. This is going to be supportive for a couple different reasons. Number one, it's going to help stabilize your blood sugar. Blood sugar issues and burnout, they're hand in hand, right? So this is where we can actually get some quick wins with our energy levels, is eating regularly and eating balanced meals. So when you're preparing your meal or when you're preparing a snack, I want you to think of the balance between what you're having, right? So do you have some healthy carbs there? Do you have some fat? Do you have some protein? Do you have some fiber? Do you have these different constituents that make up a balanced meal? Or are you looking at something that's more all from one of those categories? So you really want balance, and you don't want to go crazy with the carbs, but I also don't want you to fear them either, because carbohydrates and sugar can be a really supportive part of your adrenal recovery diet. But the thing is, if we want it to be supportive, because there's such great sources of energy, we need to be mindful of what we're having and how we're having them. Mainly like the types of foods that we're eating, so the types of carbohydrates that we're having, and also the quantities of them. So a good rule of thumb to remember, and we talk about this all the time, is when you're having something, like if you're going to have something like a slice of bread or some noodles or grains or rice, quinoa, something like that, when it comes to serving sizes, just so you have this perspective in mind, serving size is half a cup cooked. Everyone always gets so mad when I say that, but half a cup cooked or one slice of bread. So that's probably a little bit less than maybe you're used to having. So I want you to just keep that in mind if you are having a starchier carbs or those whole, things like whole grains, things like breads, things like noodles, serving size is half a cup. So start there and then build around it with the proteins and the fats, and ideally getting that carbohydrate energy from really nutrient dense foods like veggies. Okay, so that was a lot of information. So let's just step back for 1 second and do a quick recap. Number one, we're analyzing our current situation. What's working? What isn't working? If you're having trouble figuring this out and you're not sure where things are going wrong, maybe you've cut out a lot of things, maybe you've tried a lot already, this is where finding a practitioner that you trust, whether it's someone on our team, a different practitioner, a naturopath, somebody who can kind of analyze what you're currently doing and give you some objective perspective, could be really helpful. So if you're not sure what's working and what isn't, then I encourage you to get some support. Number two, we talked about eating regularly, right? The importance of having stabilized blood sugar. So important when you're burnt out. So I gave you some great tips around that, and a question that always comes up around this topic of eating regularly and snacking is, where does fasting fit into this picture? Because fasting has become a bit of a hot topic, especially this year. More and more people finding success doing things like intermittent fasting or time restricted eating. So just in a nutshell, what that is essentially is you give yourself an eating window, and essentially during that eating window, you can eat as much as you want, but outside that eating window, you don't eat at all, which is basically ensuring that you are fasting a certain amount of hours every day. So some people do intermittent fasting, and you'll see that their eating windows are pretty small. And so the amount of time that they actually spend fasting is quite long. And some people have tremendous results with this when it comes to their energy levels, when it comes to how they sleep, when it comes to their blood sugar levels. But what I find when people are really stressed out, when people are struggling with hormonal imbalances, adrenal fatigue, it's just not the best approach for this time in your life. Maybe down the road when things are a little bit more balanced and a little bit more robust. So coming back to this idea that you're depleted, right? And we're not restricting. So I do find that fasting does have a time and place in an adrenal fatigue recovery diet. Oftentimes when people struggle with like heavy nighttime eating or binge eating in the night. So if you're the type of person where maybe you eat really well all day and then after dinner when you're vegging out, like that's the time where everything kind of goes downhill, then having that really like strict cutoff window where maybe you're saying something like, okay, I don't eat after 7 p.m. until breakfast. So having that cutoff window can be really helpful if it prevents you from kind of just self-sabotaging in the evening. So I do think it has its time and place. And just keep in mind too that it's not that there has to be any set in stone rules when it comes to your fasting window too. So thinking about that, if this is something you do want to try and you do think that this is something that benefits you, but you are a little burnt out, but you are struggling with your hormones, then maybe what you do is you don't fast as long as maybe some of these other guys that you hear about on the forums that are fasting for like 16 hours a day. So maybe your eating window is much longer. And maybe you have to adjust it to what's going on in your life. So if you really struggle in the morning, you might hear that a lot of people who do intermittent fasting won't eat until like lunchtime or later in the afternoon. But when you're really burnt out, when you haven't had a good night's sleep, when mornings are your most difficult time of day, then mornings are going to be a really important time for you to be fueling yourself well. So for you, fueling yourself well throughout the day and maybe fasting in the evening, like I mentioned earlier, could be an option for you, but this is something to play with. It doesn't necessarily need to be part of your adrenal recovery diet plan, but it's something that if you're interested in and you've been wanting to maybe dabble in it just to try, this is how you can kind of incorporate it in. The next thing I wanted to talk about was managing your portions. This is huge, and this comes back to what we were talking about when it comes to blood sugar balance. So important when it comes to overcoming adrenal issues, rebalancing your hormones. Oftentimes, blood sugar imbalances really exacerbate all of these issues. And we actually know one of the most common complained about symptoms when you're burnt out, when you're struggling with your hormones, is not sleeping well. And when we don't sleep well, that actually has the capacity, just a night or two of poor quality sleep, has the capacity to put us into a pre-diabetic state. So in terms of what that means is happening with your blood sugar or the way that your body's responding to sugar in your blood is really interesting. So this is why it just makes sense when you're tired, when you're not sleeping well, you're going to have cravings, right? And what do you think those cravings are going to be for? It's going to be for the stuff that gives you energy. So this is why eating food regularly is important, but also how much you have is going to be important too. Because when you get to the point where you're feeling that hangry feeling and you're just so hungry and then you end up eating too much, what goes up must come down, and oftentimes there's a crash there. And in different scenarios, I find that people feel the effects of these crashes more. And trust me, this becomes more and more pronounced the more you're struggling with your hormones as well. So eating and figuring out the perfect ratios for you is really important. Helping people find the perfect ratio for them is work I really love to do because it can be so impactful in your recovery and it can help you have those quick wins that I mentioned earlier. Like when you figure out the portion side of things, what macro ratio is going to work for you based on where you're at right now with your adrenals and your hormones, this is what's going to give you quick wins, like I mentioned earlier. It's so huge. So it gets me really excited. This is work that we do in our Fatigue to Fabulous coaching program all the time. If you have any questions about it or want to learn more about the services we offer, you can learn more in the show notes or at the adrenalrecoverycollective.com. But yeah, this can be really big. So earlier I mentioned the half a cup serving rule when it comes to things like whole grains, right? So I really want you to keep that in mind because I find that if you overdo it on the carb front, especially those starchy carbs, then this is where you might experience like more massive energy dips after your meal. And so things become more exaggerated. So I really encourage you when it comes to navigating the portion side of things is start with that base, right? So if you are having starchy carbs from like grains or it could be something like squash, sweet potato, I want you to think about this with those starchy veggies as well. Half a cup, okay? And then from there, I want you to make sure that you're having some protein. When it comes to protein, a good rule of thumb, of course, this is going to vary. It's really hard to give specific recommendations when I'm talking so generally to all of you out there. But just as a rule of thumb, when we're thinking about protein, one serving is about the size of your palm. And when we're talking about fat, maybe like a thumb or two, a couple tablespoons of fat, little like 1/4 a cup of avocado, um, 1/4 a cup of nuts and seeds. If you want to sprinkle that on like your meal, that is a nice rule of thumb when it comes to fat. So just kind of starting there gives you a really good visual. What I actually recommend is getting some measuring cups, keeping them in your kitchen, and when you're serving yourself, use the measuring cups for a while just to get a feel for what these serving sizes really look like. And eventually it becomes easier because you start to be able to gauge more and more with your eyes over time. But I think in the beginning, it's really important for us to get a really clear sense of how much that we're eating. And then, of course, I want to talk about nutrient density because when you're depleted, you truly want to make every bite count. And nutrient density is kind of like when we think about eating for fuel and like what kind of fuel we want to eat. It ties into that because when we're eating for nutrition, it's like, how do you maximize every bite? And so when you start thinking about things this way, then you start thinking about cleaner foods, right? Because you want to get the stuff that is going to have pack a bigger punch for every single bite. And so instead of having just like a huge bowl of rice, maybe now you're thinking like, okay, I want a little bit of rice, but I want to make sure that I'm getting carb energy from colorful things more than whole grains. Because yes, there's some nutrition in the whole grains, and yes, you're going to get good energy from it, but you're going to get a lot more vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients from those colorful plants, right? So how can you sneak more carb energy from the colorful stuff, from those colorful whole foods, instead of things, and I know they're easy to grab and very tempting when you're hungry and you're tired and you're burnt out, but instead of things like the noodles and the white rice and the bread and the crackers and the muffins, it's like, can I have a little bit of that, but maximize the colorful fruits and veggies more so in my meal or in my snack? So on the topic of nutrient density, I also want to talk about the quality of your food. And all I really want to say around this today is I just want you to do the best that's within your means. I mean, in a perfect world, we'd all be able to eat like the organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised, free-run products that are available, but I know it's not realistic for all of us, and I don't want the financial side of things to stress you out even more when it doesn't have to, right? So I just encourage you to do the best with what you can within your means, right? In any case, I'd love for your diet to be focused around whole foods. If you can, looking up the environmental working groups, Dirty Dozen and Clean 15, when it comes to which types of produce are best spot organic and which are a little bit more clean that you can get away buying conventional, is a great list to just keep handy in your wallet so that you know what's worth spending the money on organic. One thing that I like to think of when it comes to like the fruits and veggies is basically how delicate is it. So things like berries or like leafy greens where it's delicate, there's not a lot of protection when it grows. Obviously, it's going to be more affected by what it's sprayed with, right? And of course, everything is to an extent, but then you have things like cauliflower or watermelon or squash, which have these hard outer shells where the inside's a little bit more protected. So a lot of the times you'll find those more robust fruits and veggies on the clean list. So just kind of something to keep at the back of your head when you're doing your shopping, but check out those lists because it can help you navigate on what's worth your effort, what's not. It can save you some money. Then when it comes to oils, I just wanted to chat about that today because I really think that investing in really good quality oils, as annoying as it might be, because I know it can be a little bit more expensive, but this is an asset to your health instead of a liability. And I do think that it's worth it to just have a couple, you don't have to have huge bottles, but a couple really nice cooking oils or oils for drizzling in your pantry that you use, and you just know that you're fueling yourself with really good quality fats. I think it's important. So some tips when it comes to buying oils, like I said, buy in small amounts so you can keep the oil as fresh as possible for as long as possible. Opt for oils that are sold in glass instead of plastic. Try to buy the organic, cold pressed, unrefined oils whenever you can, if you can. And when you store them in a cool, dark place. Oils are really affected by air, light, and heat, so we want to make sure that they're just well protected. And if you're buying things like polyunsaturated oils, and I'll give you a list in just a second, it's important to keep those in the fridge. So polyunsaturated fats are things like flax oil, hemp oil, chia oil, walnut oil, oils like that. So if you have those, keep them in the fridge, use them for drizzling. These oils shouldn't be heated. So when it comes to oils for cooking, I really like ghee. I like coconut oil, I like avocado oil. Those tend to be my go-tos when it comes to higher heat cooking. If it's lower heat cooking, I'll use something like olive oil, sometimes sesame oil. And then, like I mentioned, those polyunsaturated fats, the flax, the hemp, things like that, I just use those for drizzling. Okay, I know that that was a lot of info, and I feel like I could truly talk about this for hours and hours and hours. But I think regardless, whether you've been struggling with the diet piece for a while or whether you're just starting out, these are really solid foundations that are gonna set you up on the right foot. So think about where you're at right now. What's working? What's not working? Thinking about adrenal fatigue and hormonal imbalances and hormonal insufficiencies for what they are, a state of depletion, and then thinking of how you can fuel yourself up with clean fuel that your body can use that's going to nourish you up, and then thinking about nutrient density, right? Like how can you make that good, clean fuel that you're using work in your favor even more? How can you maximize all the nutrition that you're getting? And then before we wrap up today, I just want to say that I know all of our situations are different. I know there might be a lot of complexities that are layered into your case that might make eating really hard. And maybe you've tried tons of things and you just aren't seeing success. And maybe you feel like you've tried everything that I mentioned today and you just haven't found the thing yet. And I just want to tell you that the food part, I know it can seem so stressful, but I really encourage you just come back to simple beginnings. A lot of the times when we're dealing with a lot of complex things with our health, it's really easy to think that the solution has to be really complicated as well. And it might surprise you when you come back to these basic, simple foundations that I broke down today, how impactful they can really, truly be. So if you've gotten kind of caught up in all the complexity and all the noise online, take a step back, check yourself today, re-listen to this episode, and take some of the points that resonated with you the most and just apply them. I really hope you get some quick wins from these tips I shared today. And if you do need support taking things to the next level, this is what we support people with every single day in our Adrenal Recovery Revolution and Fatigue to Fabulous coaching programs. The Adrenal Recovery Collective is a holistic group. We have doctors, we have mindset coaches, we have nutritionists on our team, and we've come together to really help you figure out the most impactful approach to your recovery because we know you're tired, we know you don't have a lot of energy. Our team thinks it's really important for you to figure out where that little energy is best spent. So that's what we specialize in. Our mission is to really help you make it way more simple than you could have ever imagined. That's what we're here to support you with. If you need some support, feel free to book a complimentary call with one of our coaches. We'd love to hear about what you're going through and at the very least, point you in the right direction when it comes to next steps in your recovery. And we just want to remind you that you're not alone. We know how frustrating feeling tired all the time can be. It truly doesn't need to stay this way forever. And a lot of the times it's just this, what we spoke about today, simple lifestyle tweaks that make a really impactful difference. Thanks everybody for listening today. I really hope you found this content valuable. If so, we'd really appreciate a 5-star rating. Leave a review. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear next time. We're here to serve you. So glad you guys have been enjoying the podcast, and we are just excited to make more of them for you. Thank you so much for listening, and have an amazing rest of your week, and we'll see you next week.